recording.
Showtime.
Lovely, letting everybody in now. Lovely.
It's great to see everybody's smiling faces.
Everyone, lovely to see you all. Perfect. Okay, might get started. So good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, and welcome to this month's Brisbane Literary Mafia Zoom case. Tonight we'll be hearing from two writers who have a special connection to the Brisbane literary scene, and that is Kris Moriarty and the wonderful Laura Elvery, who's our guest speaker tonight. I'd like to begin tonight by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm currently zooming to you from, the Yuggera and Turrbal people. I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So before we begin tonight, I'd just like to quickly mention for any of you who are new to Avid Reader's Zoom events that at the moment we have a promotion on for event attendees, and that is if you use the code EVENT, E-V-E-N-T, at checkout on our website, then you'll receive 10% off your order, and that is applicable to everything store-wide. So I recommend that you get in early and make the most of that if you would like to purchase some of the books that are going to be talked about tonight. And so now I would like to hand you over to Kris Moriarty, who is the author of The Promised Seed and Parting Words. She's also a literary judge, a reviewer, and a regular interviewer for us at Avid Reader. And Kris, I would now like you to take it from here.
Thank you, Emma Kate, and thanks for being here tonight. We're missing Krissy tonight. She's currently wrangling all of the gazillions of people who are going to see Trent Dalton in the flesh up here in Queensland, which might seem rather amazing for those of you zooming in from other parts of the country, but that's happening. But yeah, we'll forge on without her. We've got the lovely Laura Elvery here tonight, the Queen of Short Stories.
Hello, Kris.
Laura, hello, Laura. Laura is the author of two collections of short stories, Trick of the Light and Ordinary Matter, both published by UQP. She's been published in Griffith Review, the Saturday paper quite recently, actually, Meanjin and Overland. She has a PhD in creative writing and literary studies, and she has won too many short story awards for me to even mention them all, including the Josephine Ulrich Prize. So welcome, Laura.
Thank you, Kris. Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're so excited to have you because you're the first short story writer that we've had on the Brisbane Literary Mafia.
There you go.
And we wanted to talk tonight about the short story as an art form, how it's different to a novel length form, and what particularly attracts you to writing short stories.
Well, I reckon I started, like most people do, doing a creative writing degree, and you kind of do cut your teeth on short stories a little bit, which is not to say they're easy, because they really aren't. But, you know, when I went back to do a master's at QUT, and the subjects were, you know, introduction to short story and introduction to creative writing, and it sort of was something I hadn't done before, and I started writing short stories in classes with really great lecturers. And sometimes we'd edit someone's short story on the screen in front of everyone, which was actually quite useful. And they were my assignments that I started handing in. So I even think the first one that I got published was through QUT, and was through a QUT literary journal that doesn't run anymore, that Kate Cantrell ran, called Rex. And it had these fabulous, she'd edited this beautiful journal, and that was part of this competition that QUT ran. So I think the first one I ever had published was probably something I wrote in class that ended up, you know, being okay. And so I've written so many of them, written a couple of novel manuscripts, but I just keep coming back to them, Cass. Every time I have an idea for something, my brain goes, oh, that could be a short story. My brain doesn't naturally go, oh, that could be a novel that I devote 10 years to. I'm like, that could be a short story I could write.
Yeah, I find that so interesting that it really is a different way of thinking about it. So what is it about the short story, do you think, that like, what do you get from the brevity and the, I guess, the emotional punch that can go into a short story that you maybe can't achieve in a novel?
I think it's that I can have a little bit of an idea and I can quickly write down some notes for it, work on it. If it doesn't end up anywhere, I don't feel like I've, wasted lots and lots of time. And also the way I work, which is how a lot of short story writers work, the more I listen to other writers, is this little part of an idea adds on to this little part of an idea, or this line of dialogue, or wouldn't that be an interesting title, or that little character who won't leave me alone. And then all of those little bits and pieces can become a short story kind of easily, even though I just said they're not easy, but over a short amount of time, they can exist. And also you can send them off and get feedback quite quickly, or the payoff of a publication or the payoff of a short story prize. And then the other thing, Cass, is that I just loved entering short story competitions or literary journals. They're easy things for writers groups to workshop together.
Yes.
Like in my writers group, we have novelists and short story writers. And so when someone hands over their novel, you're like, I'll see you in 6 months, people. It'll take me a while to read it, but you can work through a 2,000 or 3,000 word short story a bit quicker, perhaps.
Yeah. And you have had a lot of success with there was a period there where every single short story announcement, short listing, long listing, or winner that came out, there was your name on the list. So
you do get a little bit addicted to the deadlines. Like I was joking with someone the other day, how I just don't have the time that I used to have. Like I wrote a lot when I was writing my thesis at uni, even though my thesis wasn't on that, but I'd sort of scurry away and stealthily have a bit of an afternoon to write a short story. I just don't have that time anymore, but I still see a call out for a competition or for a journal. And even though I know I shouldn't, but I'm like, if that's my vice, that's not a bad vice, I guess, is it? I enter things and submit to competitions.
I think you could live with that.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in how you put, how an author and a publisher, I guess, or an editor puts a short story collection together. How do you choose which stories go in and which stay out? How do you choose the order that they're in? So I wondered if you might talk a little bit about that, and also perhaps a little bit about your newest book, Ordinary Matter, because that's a kind of a different format. Again, because they're all interlinked short stories.
Yeah, totally different actually. The publication of that one and then that one is the first one. So with Trick of the Light, like I said, I'd written them over about 5 years. I think there's 24 stories. I'd written them over a 5-year period. And so a lot of them had been published before. So when that came time to put Trick of the Light together, it was all really fun. It's so much fun. And I had this lovely editor in E&C who's a very kind person, but together we were able to sit together and just, be quite honest with each other. This one isn't as good as these other ones, or this one is far too similar to this other story. I remember rejecting one of them for that reason. And then when it comes time to put them together in an order, these two need to be separated because they're quite similar, or the voices are similar. You need to begin and end in a certain way. And I always read a short story collection beginning to end. I hear people who just read them in odd orders, but I read them start to finish because I think they've been put together to sort of take you on a bit of a journey itself. The first one sets you up in a certain way. But with Ordinary Matter, so it's the 20 stories and the timeline was there naturally. So the first Nobel Prize winning woman for science is 1903. The most recent is 2018. And I did think that would be that was not a hard decision. Let's put all of the stories in chronological order. So even though the stories differ in time and place, there is still an underlying chronology to the number of women who won, say, at the start of the 20th century compared to the number of women who've won even just in the first 20 years of the 21st century. So there's some other little things that the chronology sort of nods at, I guess.
And I guess when you mentioned when you're putting a short story collection together, well, Trick of the Light specifically, and you had stories that you pulled out because they were maybe too similar to ones. I guess the advantage, the advantage of that is that you can just, you don't have to discard them. You can just put them aside and wait for your next collection, and maybe they'll fit in with that.
It's funny when I go through folders, like this is why I've got a friend who writes something, submits it, deletes it, absolutely deletes everything she ever does. I know, even if it's a little article, like a commissioned article, she just deletes it. I wonder if she's watching. And whereas I've kept everything, everything I've ever, every little piece of every beginning of a story that never went anywhere. I'm not saying it's all good, that's why it's just sitting there, but I would never throw it away, because sometimes you can look through an old folder and think, oh, that's not 100% terrible, or I steal a lot of my own old stuff and put it into new stuff, which feels like good cheating and like saving time. I've done that a few times. So yeah, it's never wasted. So, but if it doesn't fit in a collection, then maybe, it might fit in another one. But I probably will give the collections a bit of a break for now. Write something else.
Give someone else a chance, Laura. No, so with Ordinary Matter, so many stories in there that I love. And we talked earlier about maybe asking you to talk about one that you hadn't talked about in previous interviews. And I wanted to ask you about Little Fly, because I think that was my favourite one in the whole book.
Oh,
and
lovely.
So I haven't heard you talk about that on any other interviews. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, sure. So Little Fly is the story devoted to Tu Youyou, who is the researcher from China. And back in 2017, when I wrote that story, because I wrote all the stories totally out of order, I thought that would be the final story in the book. So it kind of ends, in my brain, the way it ends was signalling the end of the book. And that was 2017. I knew I wanted to write a story that was related to mosquitoes and malaria, because that's what her research was in. Extraordinary research, as she found this new treatment for malaria based on 1,600-year-old Chinese texts, medical texts. So I knew I wanted to write a story about that. And I also thought I wanted to write a story about a baby girl, because this is a collection about women. And I thought, let's write a story from the perspective of a baby. So it opens with this point of view of a baby on the beach. So in 2017, I was writing it thinking this collection would be 18 stories. That would be the final one. We have this family on holiday halfway across the world. And I'm also really interested in the idea of chance and kind of how close we come to some things and how lucky we are.
The sliding doors.
Oh,
yeah.
So close to things, so lucky in some ways, so unlucky in other ways. I wanted to end it quite hopeful, in a hopeful tone. And then October 2018, Donna Strickland from Canada wins. And the next night, because they announced the Nobel Prizes week beginning 5th of October, and they announce one, as you might know, each night. So I get, bing, Donna Strickland wins. All right, I've got to write another one. Next night, Frances Arnold from America wins. Luckily, because I'm very glad they did, obviously, because good for them, and they win lots of Cronut, but also it's a nice 20 stories. Yeah. But that was it. But the 18th story, that was one of the first ones I wrote, Little Fly. I wrote that years ago, and I thought it would be the final story, but it was one of the very, very first ones I wrote. Yeah, a story about chance and luck and health.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Thanks, Cass.
And so now you're saying no more women can win the prize for science ever?
No, next week I hope they all win. I hope there are 9 women across the 3 science categories. Go for it. I hope they do. That would be amazing.
Many more books from Laura Elvery.
No more. Other people. Yeah, it'd be wonderful.
Now, talking about other people's books, Laura wants to take over my job of reading recommendations.
Just for 2 minutes.
Just for 2 minutes or 5 minutes, and give a couple of shout outs to some collections that you've been enjoying lately. So go ahead.
Yes. So when I talk about Ordinary Matter and when reviewers write about it, it is, you know, touted as a high concept short story collection that you can explain in a really easy tagline or straightforward tagline. And I think another one of my favourite high concept ones is A Constant Hum by Alice Bishop, which came out last year. And I guess the tagline for that is that it's stories based on Black Saturday fires, but I think it's just an extraordinary, very tender book filled with microfiction and short fiction. And Alice Bishop frames it around, the stories are told in 3 parts, sort of before the fires, during the fires, loosely aftermath of the fires. And I just think at a sentence level, Alice Bishop, oh God, Cass, hello, is extraordinary.
Turn the light on.
And it's got such a beautiful cover. And I just really, really loved reading this one last year, and it did really well, I think. And
I haven't read that yet. It's been on my list for ages, and I want to now you've persuaded me to move.
Yeah. And then second one is, because we're in Brisbane, well, I'm in Brisbane, is Amanda O'Callaghan's This Taste for Silence. So Amanda's a Brisbane person as well. This came out last year, and she's been shortlisted for a prize in the UK for this book alongside some really top people. And it's just a really unusual, unsettling, very original collection. Amanda's got this beautiful, confident voice. She's very precise, but the stories take unexpected turns. And again, a mix of microfiction, like flash fiction, and short stories as well.
It's quite dark.
It just leaves you as a whole collection tonally with a really interesting feeling, but she's just top quality. Amanda?
Yeah, totally agree. I love that.
Loved it.
Love that collection. Yeah.
And then Smart Ovens for Lonely People by Elizabeth Tan. I love everything Elizabeth Tan writes. Truly original stories that are, yes, like often very funny and satirical and poking fun at ourselves, but also mixture of humour and dread, totally out of this world, some of them, while also being very grounded in human emotions. And there's a couple of favourites in there, Disobeying and Washing Day and Night of the Fish are my favourite stories out of Elizabeth Tan's book.
Thank you, Laura. Some great suggestions. I hope everybody at home has got a pen and paper, or typing away, adding these to their TBR pile. Great. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Cass.
you so much for joining us tonight. It always seems so short, these little Brisbane Mafia chats that we have, but I guess that makes it easy for people to join because it's just half an hour. So you're going to hang on with us, though.
I'm going to
stay while I just quickly go through my recommendations for this month. But thanks so much, Laura. That was really fascinating. And if anyone wants to know more about short story writing, definitely look at both of Laura's books and follow her on Twitter, because she's always got something wise and beautiful to say about many things. Okay, now I am currently up in Townsville, so I don't have all my normal collection of books with me, but Emma Kate has got copies there ready for me to hold up. So these are my the top 5 books that I wanted to recommend for this month that I've been reading, all from Australian authors. So not necessarily Brisbane or Queensland authors, but they are all Australian authors. So the first one I want to talk about is the Tolstoy Estate. Emma Kate's got a copy of that. Now, this is by Stephen Conte. Now, he won the Prime Minister's Literary Award in 2008 with his debut novel, The Zookeeper's War, and then it's been a long time between drinks, and this is his second novel. It's a brilliantly observed tale of love, heartbreak, war, madness, trauma, and hope. Leo Tolstoy is a sort of a touchstone in the book, because the book is set on his actual estate where he used to live. Great setting, great characterisation, great dialogue, very, very funny. The main character, Paul Bauer, is a medical doctor who's setting up a field hospital in Russia, in the Tolstoy estate, for the advancing German army, and he meets fiery Katerina, a Russian woman who's in charge of sort of the caretaking of the estate, and they develop a fairly intense friendship. It's got all of the visceral brutality of war, a lot of medical operations and surgeries and things that they did at that time that are really interesting, but it's also very, very literary. And I would compare it probably to, if you liked All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony, I never know how to pronounce his last name, Doerr. Emma Kate, help me out here. No, she doesn't know either. All the Light We Cannot See, or The Book Thief, which everybody knows, of course, by Marcus Zusak. Similar kind of books to those. Okay, the second book I wanted to mention is a recent crime psychological thriller, The Safe Place by Anna Downs, which has caused a huge splash into that perfect infinity pool there in Australia. This is published by a firm who Christian White is one of their authors, and he does very, very good psychological drama, and Anna Downs is on a similar sort of style to that. So if you like Christian's work, you will love this. It's set in this very enchanting setting on the French coast, but it's quite sinister. And it's all about Emily, who takes up a position. Her boss offers her a job as to sort of be like a nanny, companion, housekeeper to his lonely, isolated wife and their troubled daughter. So Emily goes along to this absolutely beautiful chateau in France, and at first everything seems like it couldn't be more perfect, but things start to happen that are a bit unsettling. We discover that she's possibly an unreliable narrator, because then her boss, Scott, the husband, he starts narrating some of the chapters, and so then we think, well, what he's saying correct, or is what she's saying correct? So then we sort of start to have some doubts about, who's telling the truth. Very evocative description of place. Anna writes beautifully about place, and a great internal dialogue by Emily, the main character, as we sort of travel with her on this journey, as she becomes more and more sort of unsettled by what's going on around her. So I can highly recommend that for the crime readers out there. The third book that I wanted to mention is Throat by Ellen van Nieven. Now, unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, we don't have a copy of Throat because it was sold out at Avid Reader today, which is a good sign for Ellen. So Ellen's an Aboriginal queer non-binary poet. They wrote Comfort Food was the last collection of poetry. This book, Throat, which you can't miss the cover, it's this brilliant basics, bright colours, blue, red, orange, pink, of a sort of disconnected face. It's, once you see it, you won't forget it. It's a very meditative book. It's vulnerable. It's very confronting about racial and gender issues. Makes you think a lot about loneliness and inclusivity and culture. And there are so many quotes. One I just wanted to read this is from one of their poems. Courage is telling them what you think of that play. That script they try and write us in will no longer contain us. Bring me a new coat of oppression. This one's wearing thin. It's absolutely beautiful poetry. Ellen is one of Australia's most significant up-and-coming poets, and if you are interested in poetry, I can highly recommend that. Number 4 on the list tonight is Bluebird by Malcolm Knox. We just had an event recently at Avid to launch this book. This is a sharply observed, brilliantly funny story about a fractured family, a falling down house on the top of a cliff top in the northern Sydney beaches, and about lots of secrets that are gradually revealed in the story. So basically the house that's falling down at the top of the cliff is called the Lodge. Gordon lives there with a whole cast of characters. So there's Gordon's ex-wife Kelly, who moved out, but now, you know, long story, she's now moved back into the house. There's, even though they're not together, their son Ben lives there. There's Leonie, who's the matriarch, who's sort of pulling all these strings to make things happen. Ron and Norma are Gordon's elderly parents, who are absolutely fantastic characters. And the books are, you know, it's a real deep dive into masculinity and Aussie culture. And it's full of all of these characters that sort of drift around Gordon. And they're all sort of 50 or 60-year-old males who are all widowed or divorced or unemployed. And they all sort of hang around the lodge like it's some sort of community centre. So it's a very interesting look at certain culture and that certain, I guess, gender specific, what am I trying to say? The roles that people, you know, put on themselves and how that changes over time. You have a lot of sympathy for Gordon. He's really got a train wreck of a life happening, but you know, you kind of, you know, wanting to cheer him on because he's the underdog. It's a very funny story, and it's a lot about you know, what happens between the older generation and the newer generation. So the older generation who've always lived in the northern beaches and they've always had control of the waves and they've always had, you know, everything their way, and then there's new people coming in, younger people with new money, building huge renovations and sort of destroying their way of life. And I just absolutely love this book. His previous book, it didn't resonate as much with me, but this one I really, really enjoyed. So if you like Malcolm Knox, definitely have a look at this one. The next one, which I do have a copy of, you see that, is A Tricky Nick, and I can see Nicholas Johnson smiling away. Hi, Nick. Now, the reason I have a copy of this in Townsville with me, because I wasn't going to bring my copy because, you know, plane weight and baggage restrictions and whatever, but when I got up here, my daughter was actually reading it. She brought it with her, so that was very handy. So she's just finished it. She's 13. She loved it. So Nick is actually a working magician, and this is the very true story of his life, except for the bits that aren't true or the bits where he's lying, which magicians apparently quite often do. It was launched yesterday. There was a whole host of kids online yesterday for the Zoom launch for this book. It's a really great middle-age adventure story. I don't often do recommendations for kids' books, but this one I really loved as an adult too. I thought, I mean, it's great for kids, but it's also great for adults, anywhere from 7+. As well as being a fun adventure story about this kid, Nick, and sort of how he gets into magic and the sort of scrapes he gets into along the way. It's also about confidence and friendship and self-belief and risk-taking, and, you know, can totally recommend this for any young people in your life, and I'm sure you will want to borrow it from them once they've finished. And the last one, and we're nearly out of time, is, of course, All Our Shimmering Skies by Trent Dalton. Now, I have literally just finished this book last night and wrote a review on it today, so I don't even have any notes in front of me about it. This book is a marvel. Boy Swallows Universe, of course, you know, has sold 500,000 copies in Australia and has done extremely well. Very hard to, you know, follow up on that kind of pressure, but I think that Trent has done it. This, in fact, I think is better than Boy Swallows Universe, because I think because of the autobiographical nature of that first book, I feel like that kind of restrained some of the things that he felt he could do as an author, because he was talking about, in some cases, real people who were still alive. Whereas with this book, All Our Shimmering Skies, it is complete fiction, complete imagination, and he has just let his imagination go wild. Molly Hook is the protagonist, a 12-year-old girl, and if you loved Eli Bell from Boy Swallows Universe, you will just equally love Molly Hook. She's the gravedigger's daughter. She's that's how she's known, and that's what she does. She digs graves. She lives a very brutal, harsh existence. Her mother's gone. She lives with a father who's sort of disconnected and an abusive uncle. She has a horrible life. But into all of that comes Greta, who's an actress who wants to be on the stage. There's Yukio, who's a Japanese pilot who literally falls from the sky, because this is set in Darwin in 1942 when the Japanese are bombing the hell out of the city. And it's all about an adventure. It's a quest. It's about Molly's quest to find Longcoat Bob, who she thinks is an Indigenous person who's put a curse on her family because of something that her relatives did generations before, and has made all of their hearts turn to stone. And so she and this ragtag collection of people go on this quest to try and reverse the curse. And Trent's done a beautiful job. I think possibly the Northern Territory might use this as a advertisement for their tourism campaign, because the description in it is of the flora, the fauna is really beautiful. And he's done a really great job too, I think, of handling the Indigenous issues, which, you know, can always be very tricky balancing that, but he has been completely respectful to that side of the story, and I think has done a really good job of that too. So this is a book, once again, like Boy Swallows Universe, parts of it are really, really hard to read and really uncomfortable, but at the centre of it is hope and optimism and love. And I think that this one will be really popular as well. So that is actually physically being launched tonight, as we said, at the Tivoli in real life in Brisbane. So Trent is probably now on the stage talking to his fans, but we just want to give it a mention here. So that's my 6. I snuck in an extra one. We've got 6 tonight recommendations, Emma Kate. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Cass. And thank you, Laura, as well. Thanks for a phenomenal discussion. I've shared those recommendations in the chat box with you all. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's been absolutely lovely having you here for this month's Brisbane Literary Mafia Zoomcast. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, so I'm now going to take you all off mute so that you can join me in thanking Cass and Laura.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. See you next month. Trent Dalton next month.
Thank you. Thanks, Cass. Thanks, Emma Kate.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Have a lovely evening.